there's a little notch out of here. There's one here, and those notches locate the bearings. Now, this is number 1 main. You can see a number 1 here. And have a look at these old caps. They tell you a lot of things. Now, where the notch is here, I call them witness marks. You can just see a little shadow there. So that means that this goes this way. Looks like there's a dowel missing there. So we've got to find that and see if it's in the pot there. And that cap goes on that way with the 2 tags on the same side. And if you look at some of the other ones, it's a bit more obvious in number 2. You can see the shadow there. So there's your little locating pip, and that fella there, you can just see the shadow there. So something to look for. Make sure the bearings go there, go correctly, and the caps go in the right spot. Now, with these front and rear, it's probably hard to muck them up. You know, you've got see the shadow at the front here. Even though that's clean, like it doesn't come off. That there is where the oil pump bolted on, so we know that goes that way. So the first thing we do is get the bearing shells. Now, if you remember, these were offset, so you must wipe in here, get it as clean can be. Nothing under it. Now these bearings here, make sure there's nothing in there. No wax. Sometimes there's a waxy surface or something like that on it. But another thing to draw to your attention is on the other half of that bearing, there's no oil hole. So on pretty well all engines, the oil comes up the main bearing and then goes across to your big ends. So can you see that? There's no oil hole in one of them. We're getting a bit of flash. I'm trying to get enough light to film, and then we're getting a bit of flash from having the door wide open. So this bearing, locate your little pip here. Just push it in with your fingers. Then you've got it right when that's pretty well level. We can put this one in the cap at the moment. Get him ready to go. We need to make sure everything's all nice and clean, and this is where you have to be a bit anal about having everything clean. You've really got to be onto it. Makes a difference between a good job and a bad one. Now, same with number 2. Doesn't matter which bearing goes in there. In number 2, the centre ones, they've all got oil holes, so it doesn't matter, but you need to give it a wipe, make sure it's clean. I've blown all these holes out. Make sure it feels nice when it sits in there. But yeah, these go in dry, no oil. These are very soft too, so don't go pushing them in with a screwdriver or anything like that. They're steel back, but this babbitt metal, as they call it, it's very soft. And on the rear main bearing, another thing, like, don't sit them down over like that, because this will mark up for you. Now on the rear one, same thing. Wipe him up, you should be good at doing the dishes. Right, now take a moment and just have a look. All your oil holes are lined up, that's nice. We haven't got a thrust bearing in here yet. So if you remember the thrusts, this thrust has a steel back on it. The thrust bearings sit in here, each side. And I might just put a dab of grease on the back of those just to hold them in place. There's no other need for it really. It's just that when we're putting the crank down, we can actually spin these in. You can push the crank one way and spin them in, which look, I think we will do that today. Now make sure you've got some clean engine oil. There's all sorts of stuff you can put on here, like Maury's. I use Maury's, it's a friction modifying thing. You could use Lucas. Lucas is an American thing. They often have assembly lube, proper assembly lubes that are made for assembling. And I do have some here, but I'm just trying, with this series, I'm just trying to get it through what the bloke at home in the shed would possibly have. I know I've got stuff the bloke in the shed won't have, but the bloke in the shed might be able to borrow something. Now once again, I've cleaned this crank, I've blown all the journals. Now we need to be very careful dropping that in. Now you'll notice there's a bit of movement there. That's because the thrust bearings aren't in. With a squirt of oil, you're not going to see that really, but with a squirt of oil on the front of the crank there, steel to the block, babbitt metal to the crank. I can pull the crank back against the tip of that and then just turn it in. Then we can pull the crank right back and put the back one in. So now you would actually have a measurable crank end float there, and look, up to 10,000ths of an inch is okay with that. I don't want to do that just yet, we're going to do other things, but just sitting the crank in there, the reason I'm doing this just at the moment the way we're doing it is there's a thing called Flexi Gauge, and I'm going to run you through using Flexi Gauge at home in the shed to know whether you've got a proper oil clearance. So I'll get organised for that and I'll come back. Okay, I'm over this direction here. I'm coming in from that way, so you're opposite me. So I'll probably get my lefts and right mixed up, but this is the main bearing journals. And the main bearing journals, we need to know what clearance we have, what oil clearance we have. I'll just put a little bit of oil there, not much. My oil can's got a little brass tip on it, so I shouldn't be marking up the bearing surfaces. Now there's a thing called Flexi Gauge. Where are we? And you'll see on the bottom here, there's a tiny little wax strip. Now this, most engines are a couple of thou, 3 thou oil clearance. So this wax, you break off a little piece of it and you put it across your bearing journal like that. Break off a piece across the bearing journal. Now don't turn the crankshaft because you'll just spread it out. Now this is just wax, tiny little wax strip. So we put a little piece of wax Flexi Gauge across, And they come in different sizes. Now, they have metric on one side, imperial on the other. ACL Flexi Gauge, that's 4 to 9 thou. That might be upside down for you, I don't know. And there's a yellow one as well. So, yeah, look it up, it's a great tool for what we're using it for. Now, all we do from here is pop the main bearing cap in. Make sure it's clean once more. Now this one's number 2. We can see our shadow. I'm going to shift this camera and bring it around behind me. Put this shadow on the right way. And a little bit of oil on the threads. We tension it down. All the bolts are the same here. But the idea is not to turn the crank here, we just clamp it down, then we lift the caps back off. I'll go and put all the other caps on and I'll come back and we'll pull them off and I'll show you the end result. Okay, what I've done, I've put the wax strip in and I've tensioned the caps down, I think at 156 Newton meters. So what we're going to do now is just rattle them off again. Around the front. And we'll pop the caps off again gently. This is all without turning the crankshaft too. Now, where's the viewfinder? I'll see if I can bring you right in close. I might just try number 2 if I can somehow get you zoomed into there. Okay, you see that little wax, the thickness of the wax strip here? Now how you use this, you see the 2, whites 3, or red 2, white 3, red 4, white 5, red 6. So we're looking for around 3.5 thou oil clearance, something like that. So what you do now is you bring the gauge over. I'll have to look the oil clearance up, but if we look at that there, just a little bit of oil there. That's pretty close to 2. Very close to 2. Now we put 3 there and the wax is just wider than number 3. Now this fella here, he's just a little narrower than number 2, just a little wider than number 3, so we've got about 2.5 there. Pardon me. Oh yes, you can see this one. No, you can't. And the back one is 2.5 to 3. Pardon me, my throat's just gone dry while I've been talking to you. And the front one here, look, it's around 3/1000 of an inch. So what we've done is put the Flexi Gauge on, clamped the cap up, not turned it at all. Pardon me. And some clever person from ACL Flexi Gauge has worked out that an oil gap of 2/1000 of an inch will be a certain width. So what we've done there, we've done a couple of things really. We've made sure that we have an oil gap there. It gives us a chance to make sure we're within spec, so we're around 2/1000 of an inch. Remember, we had about half a thou crank wear right along. We have about 2 thou oil clearance through here. 2.5 maybe, but yeah, it's mainly, most of them are around 2 thou. So what we've also checked is we got the right bearings. You know, we haven't mistakenly got a 10 thou undersized bearing or something like that, so it won't nip up. So the procedure now we know how we're going there, is clean this up, clean all the wax off, and I usually put a bit of lubricant or something like that here, and then because we know we're within clearance there now, I'm sure we're right. I do have to go up the house and look up the clearance, but I thought we had up to 3 or 3.5 of an inch, and we're down to 2.5. Even on the journals it looks a tiny bit worn. So okay, I'll tidy this up. I'll put the caps back on, tension them up. I still can't find that dowel for number 1 here, and I've only had the block here, out where I pressure cleaned it, and on the press to press the liners in. So, and I've looked, I've swept the floor, everything, and I can't find the dowel for up the front here, so I can't tension that one finally. I'll do its final tension at least. I've got to go back through the footage now and make sure it had one. Perhaps it didn't. Perhaps they just lined it up and clamped it down or something. I don't know. It seems odd that everything went straight into the pot underneath. As I undone it, it went straight into the pot. No stops, no nothing. And now I can't find it. So anyway, that seems to be life of a bloody old tractor mechanic. I'll get all these nipped up, and then I'll probably go up to the house and grab the dial gauge, and we'll check our crankshaft end float back and forth, make sure we're within specification there. Okay, I've got one bearing cap on. I've just put the next one on. What I'm using for assembly is Morey's heavy duty oil stabiliser. I've used that for assembling engines for years. It's nice and sticky and stringy, and doesn't stop them running in from my experience. So once we have the bearing cap on, I've already done this one. Once we have the bearing cap on, we tension. Let's see if I can move out a bit with the camera. No, that's about as good as you're going to get. We tension the cap. Just pull gently. Don't reef on it. And after each cap gets tensioned, just have a look. Number 2, number 3, they're in the right spots. Now, can we turn the crank? Yes, we can. Crank turns beautifully. So the rear main. Now the rear main, we have to make sure there's no wax left on from our Flexi Gauge. I think it would melt out anyway, but anyway, I'll always make sure it's off. Now this cap can only go one way. It has the number 4 in line with the 234, and we have the surface at the back here for the engine, rear engine seal, I should say. Now I've just dropped the thing. I need to get you further away. I'm a bit awkward, but anyway, I just can't at the moment. Now this bearing here, if you remember the thrust that had the thrust with the tags on them, front and rear thrusts are the same thickness. So the steel goes to the cap because the cap is the fixture. We put a big squirt of this Morris in, a bit round the edge. Hold the thrusts into place. Drop that on. Tension him up. I have to go to the house and get a dial gauge to check the crankshaft end float for you. Just pull them firm to start with at least. Nice steady pull. You can hardly see that, but anyway. And once again, check the crank turns. Beautiful. So after each time you tension something, just take a moment for a look. Now check the caps are on correctly, which they are. We've tensioned them down, which that's okay. And the crank turns freely, which is another sign that everything's where it should be, where we'd like it. Now, with the rear rope seal here and the rope seal housing, probably about now, well look, whenever you get your engine kit, go through your gasket set, find your rope seal and put it in a little butter pot or margarine pot of oil. And we'd like to let the oil soak into it, so on initial start up it doesn't burn. So take time now to do that. Just a little footnote, I mentioned before about soaking your rope seals, your rear seals. There's my rear seals, and I've got them in a little paint bucket, expensive pot I suppose, but anyway, not to worry. And put them in any old engine oil, or new engine oil or something like that. Now that looks red, it's not automatic transmission fluid, that's just a little bit I had left in a pot that's Briggs & Stratton engine oil, you know, the straight Mono 30. So we'll leave that to soak for a day or two. No need to put the rear engine seal on yet, up the back here, so we'll just let that soak. And the idea is to oil impregnate those rope seals so that when we put it on and we do our initial start up, we're not going to burn the seal and polish it, and as soon as you burnish the seal and it becomes glazed on the top sort of thing, and where the crank runs at the back and where the rope seal runs there, it just becomes polished and it doesn't leak, or it doesn't seal oil properly. So that's what I've always done. So yeah, follow along. Right, I had a look at the end float for the crank, and it's 2 to 11 thou. So 2 to 11 thousandths of an inch. So I've used a digital dial gauge. Now you can see up there we're on 0 pretty well. And we just put a screwdriver in here and lever one way. We got 10 thou there. When we move it this other way, we have half a thou. You'd have to hold load on it. So I'll see if we can get you a better view. Okay, so there's our 10th thou. That's when I lever it back. When I lever it forward, I'll try and zero it again. We're showing half a thou there. Very touchy. And then levering back once more. 10.5 and 0. 10.5 and 0.5. So look, we're around 10 thou. We're up on the loose end of the spec there, but pardon me. I'm up on the loose end of the spec there, but look, that's going to be okay. Yeah, with the crank must be slightly worn on the thrust surfaces, and with new thrusts, we're in spec anyway, and that's all we're really going to worry about. That's all we can do just there at the moment. So we've got our bearing clearance, we've got everything rotating nicely, and we've got our end cap, our end float within spec. So that's it. That's the crank back in, and yeah, we'll move along.